Hey guys, tonight we are heading straight into the smoke, sparks, and slightly embarrassing corners of Mount Olympus. You're standing in a forge where the air smells like hot iron and old grudges, and every clang of the hammer is a reminder that not every god gets the glamorous job of hurling lightning bolts or stirring up storms. Instead, you find yourself watching Hephaestus, the god who proves that sometimes being the brains and hands behind the scenes also means being the butt of immortal jokes. His beard is singed, his robe is stained with soot, and his limp makes his entrance less majestic and more like the world's first blacksmith, hobbling in late to a staff meeting. Of course, you probably won't survive the god's workplace drama long enough to appreciate his skill. Immortal politics are sharper than any sword he could ever craft. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And since I'm curious, drop a comment with your location and the local time. Imagine mortals scattered across the globe, all half asleep, listening to a story about the Olympian god of malfunctioning furniture. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge deeper into the forge, where Hephaestus is hunched over an anvil glowing red at the edges. Sparks spit like tiny fireflies, and molten bronze drips in slow, hypnotic beads. Unlike Zeus, who gets to wave his hand and call down thunder as though he's ordering takeout, Hephaestus actually has to sweat for a living. He embodies craftsmanship in a way no other god bothers to, hammering metal until it bends to his will. Historians still argue whether the Greeks respected him as a master artisan or pitied him as Olympus's least fashionable oddball. Both might be true. You can picture the Olympians lounging upstairs, goblets of nectar in hand, gossiping about mortal affairs, while Hephaestus is down here creating the very weapons and jewelry that make their posturing possible. That golden scepter Hera waves around? His work. The thunderbolts Zeus hurls like darts at annoying humans? His work. Even Achilles' famous armor, polished enough to blind enemies and probably impractical in rush hour traffic. Yep, that was hammered into shape by Hephaestus. And yet, despite this resume, his story always seems to come packaged with humiliation. The limp, for one thing. According to one version, he was born with it, and Hera, queen of passive-aggressive parenting, threw him straight off Olympus like yesterday's garbage. In another version, it was Zeus who did the tossing, because Hephaestus dared take Hera's side in an argument. Either way, you're watching a god fall 9 days and nights, splashing down on an island, bone broken, pride shattered, and career path involuntarily chosen. When people say, follow your passion, they probably don't mean follow it down a cliff because your mom couldn't stand your crooked legs. And yet, here he is, hammering away, proving that rejection can sometimes forge talent hotter than any flame. Mainstream historians note how his cult spread across industrial centers like Lemnos, where blacksmiths kept his flame alive. Quirkier tidbits suggest local smiths even staged rituals where they pretended to limp in his honor, hobbling around like sympathetic cosplayers at the world's least fun convention. Whether they meant it as reverence or gentle mockery, historians still argue. The rhythm of his forge becomes oddly soothing to you. Each clang is predictable, steady, a lullaby made of iron and sweat. And in this slow cadence, you realize something. While other gods rule through fear or beauty or sheer charisma, Hephaestus rules through patience. He doesn't win arguments with eloquence, he just waits until everyone else needs a new toy or weapon. Suddenly, the god who looks like Olympus's weakest link becomes indispensable. Even if they don't invite him to the fun parties, they always circle back when a shield, a spear, or a suspiciously tricky chair is required. Imagine being the office IT guy. No one remembers your birthday, but everyone needs you when the Wi-Fi goes down. That's Hephaestus. Eternally underestimated, eternally necessary. And as you lean against a pillar, watching the sparks flare and die, you can't help but smile at the irony. In a pantheon obsessed with appearances, the god of awkwardness forged the very tools that made Olympus shine. You're still leaning against the pillar when the forge smoke clears just enough for you to remember the most infamous part of Hephaestus' backstory. That grand toss from Olympus. It wasn't graceful, not even close. Imagine a baby god swaddled in divine cloth, suddenly plucked up by an annoyed parent and pitched over the edge of the clouds like an unwanted casserole dish. The fall wasn't over in a blink either. It supposedly lasted 9 full days and nights. You can almost hear him whistling through the air like an anvil in a cartoon, except no one was laughing. Well, except maybe Hera, depending on which storyteller you believe. When he finally crashed onto the island of Lemnos, bones bent and pride mangled, mortals were the ones who took him in. This is one of those mythological details that feels almost tender. A group of humans, fragile and fleeting as they were, tending to a wounded god. Historians still argue whether this symbolizes how metalworking knowledge passed from mortals to the divine, or the other way around. Either way, it marks the moment Hephaestus traded Olympus's cold marble floors for the warmth of volcanic stone. And what a volcanic island it was. Lemnos bubbled with the kind of fire that felt half dangerous, half creative. The Greeks loved imagining gods tied to landscapes, and here you can picture young Hephaestus, limping along blackened rocks, lava glowing like veins beneath his feet, thinking, well, at least the scenery matches my mood. This was his accidental internship, learning to harness the island's molten heart for craft. Mainstream history tells us Lemnos was indeed a hub for metalworking in antiquity, with archaeological finds of furnaces and tools scattered across its rugged terrain. The quirky side note? Later travelers wrote about mysterious Kabiric cults, secretive brotherhoods who worshipped Hephaestus with strange rites, possibly involving fire dances, masks, and cryptic chants. No one quite agrees what they did, but you can imagine mortals limping deliberately in torchlight, trying to channel the blacksmith god's energy. Historians still argue whether these cults were religious, theatrical, or just the ancient world's version of a very confusing costume party. For Hephaestus, Lemnos wasn't just exile, it was a forge of identity. Here he discovered that broken legs didn't matter when you had steady hands. And steady hands he had. You picture him experimenting like a mad scientist, hammering ores, quenching metals in water that hissed like an angry snake, and slowly creating not just tools, but beauty. The paradox was obvious. The most physically imperfect god produced the most technically perfect creations. And yet, there's a sadness under it all. You sense it as he limps back to his anvil. The knowledge that he's building, not just out of love for craft, but out of a need to matter again to those who cast him aside. Every clang of hammer against metal feels like a coded message aimed skyward. See? I'm worth keeping. And the irony is, the more magnificent his work became, the more Olympus realized they couldn't live without him. You may be tempted to sympathize, until you remember this is a god whose later inventions included booby-trapped furniture. Maybe exile taught him resilience, or maybe it planted the seed of mischief. After all, if your own mother had tossed you like a frisbee, wouldn't you eventually cook up a prank or two? By the time he returned to Olympus, Hephaestus wasn't just the limping outcast. He was armed with a skill set no one else could match. Zeus might thunder, Athena might strategize, Apollo might sing pretty tunes, but only Hephaestus could shape divine weapons, weld palaces of gleaming bronze, and yes, construct chairs that would one day humiliate gods. It's as if the fall was less a punishment and more an origin story. The awkward prelude to his starring role as Olympus's reluctant engineer. And yet, you wonder, as the firelight flickers across his scarred face, whether he ever forgave Hera. Historians still argue whether his later tricks, especially that notorious chair, were aimed at reclaiming dignity, exacting revenge, or just making sure family dinners were never boring again. You lean closer to the forge, and now the clang of metal shifts into something more dramatic. Because Hephaestus' career doesn't just stop with pretty trinkets. No, he's also the god who supplies Zeus with thunderbolts. Imagine working under the kind of boss who insists on having an endless supply of sky-shattering lightning, just in case someone down below dares to skip a sacrifice. That's your job description. Forge celestial darts for the king of the gods, while trying not to roll your eyes at how petty his vendettas get. The mainstream historical fact is that the Greeks genuinely believed Hephaestus crafted Zeus's weapons, not conjured them. Unlike other gods who pulled power straight from thin air, Zeus outsourced his arsenal. One quirkier detail is that ancient vase painters occasionally depicted Hephaestus hammering away at thunderbolts as if they were oversized dinner forks, sparks flying in every direction. You can't help but laugh at the image. The king of Olympus wielding what looks like a three-pronged barbecue tool of doom. Historians still argue whether this artistic choice was symbolic, practical, or just the ancient equivalent of an inside joke. But it wasn't only thunderbolts. Hephaestus built palaces, thrones, weapons, shields, and even Pandora herself. Yes, the original "don't open this box" disaster. His fingerprints are all over Greek myth, like a slightly greasy mechanic who fixed your chariot, but forgot to wipe his hands on a rag. And through it all, you can sense the tension. He crafts marvels, but he rarely gets the glory. No one cheers the blacksmith when the warrior charges into battle gleaming like the sun. You watch as he quenches a newly forged blade, steam rising in great hissing clouds. His limp slows him, but not his precision. Every detail matters, the balance of the blade, the shine of the armor, the way a breastplate might dazzle so brightly it blinds the enemy. Mortals later swore Achilles' armor, made by Hephaestus, was so radiant it could scare off entire battalions. Meanwhile, Hephaestus himself never made it onto the battlefield. He was the genius in the workshop, not the hero in the song. The gods, of course, were no easier to please than mortals. Zeus demanded faster production. Hera wanted ornaments more beautiful than anyone else's, and Ares grunted for weapons that could slice through anything. And there was Hephaestus, hammer in hand, the divine version of an overworked IT guy fielding non-stop tickets. You picture him muttering under his breath, "Sure, Ares, I'll get to your spear right after I finish polishing Aphrodite's necklace. Maybe submit your request in writing next time?" Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources whisper that Hephaestus once built an entire palace for the gods made of bronze that shone so brightly it looked like fire at sunset. Imagine Olympus shimmering, glowing with his craft, while no one paused to say thanks. Historians still argue whether this architectural marvel was meant to be metaphorical, an image of divine brilliance, or whether people really believed in a skyscraper of bronze gleaming above the clouds. The irony is sharp. Every clang of his hammer made Olympus more powerful, but every clang also reminded him of his distance from that power. He was indispensable, yes, but never adored. That simmering mix of necessity and neglect eventually forged something stranger than armor. Resentment that shaped itself into jokes, traps, and those infamous awkward chairs. As the night deepens, you hear his anvil ring again. Each strike is steady, relentless, almost hypnotic. You start to feel the pull of drowsiness, lulled by the rhythm, and yet the thought lingers. A god who supplies thunderbolts must carry his own kind of storm inside. The hammer slows, and you notice that Hephaestus isn't just defined by his role as Olympus's blacksmith. He is also quite simply lonely. You can almost feel it in the way he lingers by the forge after the work is done, staring at the glowing embers as if waiting for them to talk back. Other gods party upstairs in golden halls, their laughter spilling out like wine, while he sits surrounded by bellows, anvils, and the hiss of quenching water. His only true company is the molten bronze, the hiss of steam, and the occasional mortal craftsman limping in his honor. Loneliness and brilliance often walk hand in hand. You see it here in the flicker of his eyes, always calculating, always searching for the next invention. For Hephaestus, creativity is both a refuge and a kind of protest. When no one invites you to their feast, you design a goblet that pours nectar flawlessly. Or better, one that splashes it onto the lap of whoever you dislike most. Historians still argue whether Hephaestus's reputation as a trickster was secondary to his artistry, or whether his artistry was always tinged with a little revenge. Mainstream fact. He was worshipped as the patron of craftsmen across Greece, particularly in Athens, where his cult was paired with Athena's. Together, they represented the blend of skill and wisdom that made civilization possible. Quirky tidbit. Some Athenians believed he literally fathered the city's first king, Erichthonius, after an awkward attempt to woo Athena went wrong. Long story short, bodily fluids landed on the earth. The earth became pregnant, and out popped a half-serpentine child. You can almost hear the gods whispering at Olympus's water cooler. Trust Hephaestus to invent the world's weirdest paternity case. Yet here in the glow of his forge, you don't see scandal. You see a man channeling solitude into creation. The golden chains he weaves sparkle like starlight. The delicate filigree on a goddess's tiara looks like frozen sunlight. Hephaestus doesn't just pound out weapons. He coaxes beauty from ore as if metal itself softens in his presence. And still the halls above remain distant, the laughter muffled, the company absent. You imagine him talking to his tools as if they were friends. Bellows, tongs, hammers, each with a personality in his mind. Later myths will even say he created automatons, golden maidens who moved and served with uncanny grace. They weren't just assistants, they were stand-ins for the companionship he lacked. Historians still argue whether these automatons were pure myth, allegories for technology, or early imaginings of robots. But in this moment, you picture them bustling around, polishing armor, fetching materials, humming softly. A family born of bronze and loneliness. What strikes you most is his resilience. After being hurled from Olympus, after the limp, after the isolation, he didn't crumple. He built. He crafted. He schemed. He found meaning in the fire and company in the clang of his forge. If Zeus and Hera thought tossing him aside would erase him, they miscalculated. The exile forged him into something sharper, stranger, and ultimately indispensable. And maybe that's why, when he finally turns from the forge, there's a gleam in his eye. Not just from reflected firelight, but from the quiet satisfaction of a man who knows he's preparing a trick or two. After all, being ignored is painful, but inventing a chair that turns the tables on your mother? That's therapy. You catch the change before you see it. The forge smells less like smoke and more like myrrh, and the light seems to soften as if the fire itself is trying to look presentable. Aphrodite has drifted in. You feel the room recalibrate, iron filing by iron filing, toward the gravity of charm. She glides past racks of tongs and trays of rivets as though they were flower beds, and Hephaestus, steady hands, singed beard, sets down his hammer a heartbeat too late. The courtship begins without poetry, only the click of metal cooling and the hush that follows beauty wherever it walks. You stand close enough to hear the bellows sigh like someone remembering how to breathe. Depending on which storyteller you nudge awake, the marriage arrives by bargaining, bribery, or bureaucracy. Olympian HR at its clumsiest. Zeus wants calm, Hera wants dignity, the court wants fewer scenes, and Hephaestus wants at long last to belong. You linger near a rack of half-finished buckles and watch him craft gifts that double as arguments. Necklaces that whisper loyalty, bracelets that fasten like promises, earrings that glitter like laughter held a moment too long. He offers workmanship because that is the dialect his heart speaks, measured, precise, durable. She accepts because accepting is the art she was born to, and a small smile can sign a treaty more quietly than ink. A mainstream note steadies the scene. Homer already knows this union. In the Odyssey's island performance, the Phaeacian bard sings of Aphrodite the wife of Hephaestus, and the hall chuckles at the mismatch, even as it nods along. The goddess of desire floats, the god of anvils limps. She conquers rooms by entering them. He conquers matter by hammering it. Odd pairs can be tender, though, and for a time you catch them in small mercies. Her visiting the shop at dusk when the heat has softened. Him tempering metal in water until it sighs instead of hisses. Both of them letting the evening be gentler than reputation. Quirkier traditions trail behind her like gauze. Some late tellers insist he fashioned a shimmering girdle for her, a technicia wonder that made allure almost visible, a wearable treaty between craft and charm. Others say wedding rings, those tiny circles of promise, ought to fall under his patronage, since he turned stubborn ore into vows. You imagine Athenian goldsmiths smiling into their cups at that benediction. May every solder hold, may every promise keep. Still, you sense the sputter beneath the sparkle. The forge is too loud for her taste, too unglamorous. His jokes are dry as charcoal. Hephaestus tries hospitality the only way he knows. He makes things. Chairs that curve to the back just so. Footstools that don't wobble. A jewelry box whose lid closes with a satisfied little sigh. He gifts because gifts are the language of hands. She receives because queens receive. The problem is not the gifts, it's the grammar. He writes long, careful sentences. She speaks in glances and weather. You trail them into a side room where he's set a quieter bench, a place to talk. He speaks about joinery. She talks about banquets. He points out a new alloy's luster. She describes a sunset over Cyprus. Neither is wrong, both are distant. You catch the smallest smile from her when he shyly presents a pendant, shaped like a seashell. An honest, clumsy metaphor for a birth from foam meeting a life in fire. He tries to say, without saying, that he sees her as a person, not a prize. It lands, almost. But Olympus is a small town with a tall view. Ares drops by more often than chance requires. Hallways repeat what hallways hear, and gossip outruns the truth like a chariot with greased axles. You note Hephaestus's shoulders tighten, his hammer rise and fall with a fraction too much force. He is a master of joining metal, but jealousy is a seam that never closes cleanly. Historians still argue whether ancient audiences were meant to pity him, laugh at him, or read the marriage as a civic allegory about pretty power versus useful labor. It isn't all sorrow. There are evenings when she lingers in the doorway and laughs at a joke that wasn't even very good. Mornings when he burnishes silver so bright, the room seems rinsed in moonlight. Afternoons when his golden maidens, those uncanny helpers you met earlier, move around her with a choreography that feels almost like respect. The automatons bow, offer a stool, bring a comb. You see her watch them with curiosity, perhaps even admiration. A household built from talent instead of flattery. In the city below, smiths keep his festival and brides keep hers. Athens pairs Hephaestus with Athena at the Chalkaya, honoring craft and wisdom together. A wedding singer somewhere teases a bride with lines about the lame and the lovely, a comic trope older than the singer himself. Meanwhile on Lemnos, the fire hills glow and mortals light small braziers to bless their workshops and sometimes their marriages, because heat can harden or soften depending on how you handle it. Hephaestus, for his part, tries to engineer happiness like a mechanism with known tolerances. He regulates airflow to cool the rooms. He installs a fountain that trickles with an almost seaside hush. He even designs a dining couch with perfect reclining angles, ergonomic long before anyone used the word. Joke 1. If he ever launches a startup, it will be called Lounge Ops. Seed round, nectar. In all of this, he is earnest, not slick. The gods tease him for it, mortals would understand. The truth hanging in the heat is that mismatches can still be meaningful. Hephaestus embodies patience, process, the cumulative dignity of days. Aphrodite embodies spark, immediacy, the unarguable yes of desire. When sparks meet process, sometimes you get a lamp that lights a household. Sometimes you get smoke. Their marriage does both. You hear it in the rhythm of the anvil, 2 notes, not quite a chord trying. For a time they actually enjoy trying. You witness him setting aside a thunderbolt order, remember, the barbecue forks of doom, to etch her a compact mirror bordered with tiny doves. You hear her, surprised by her own sincerity, ask about the scene on Achilles' new shield. And he answers, warmed by the question, describing cities in peace and cities in war, cattle and dances and oceans that look like hammered dusk. Joke 2. You consider ordering a shield engraved with "Do Not Disturb." Finally, a boundary even gods might respect. The forge listens, and for a moment they are almost a conversation, not a contrast. The sputter returns between those bright notes. She is all reception, he is all manufacture. He thinks problems have fixable parts. She knows moods rewrite physics. He can rivet a hinge to last a century. She can change the room with a single eyebrow. The day will come soon when he stops trying to tune the atmosphere and builds something that tunes people. A device with manners like silk and intentions like chain. You can probably guess what kind of furniture that will be, but for now, you breathe and let anticipation cool like metal in clean water. On a bench by the door sits a pair of wedding slippers he made for her, soles flexible as fish skin, uppers delicate as sunrise. She wore them once, then placed them where they could be seen. That is its own kind of affection, or at least a photograph of one. Joke 3. You resist the urge to leave a sticky note that says, "Great taste, please leave a 5-star review." Hephaestus notices your glance, smiles without showing teeth, and turns back to the work that keeps his heart from cooling. He cannot hammer love into shape, not exactly, but he can build the rooms in which love might possibly consent to stay. And that is what he does as the torches gutter, and the court drifts toward banquets. He measures, he polishes, he adjusts the angle of a chair back that is just a little too unforgiving. Still imagining comfort as a solvable equation. Still believing that with enough patience, even an awkward marriage can be persuaded to sit. The trouble begins with a whisper, as it always does on Olympus. You hear it trickle down marble hallways. Aphrodite is not where she's supposed to be. Hephaestus notices first in the rhythm of absence. The forge is too quiet. His careful gifts go unremarked. The golden maidens stand idle, waiting for instructions that never come. And then the truth is obvious. She is slipping away to Ares, the god of war, who carries himself like a spear thrown too fast to stop. You stand at the forge's edge as Hephaestus grips his hammer, not in anger but in calculation. He is not a warrior. His strength is not in the open field. His power is in plans, mechanisms, devices that seem harmless until they snap shut. So, when the story of the affair grows too loud to ignore, he does not storm into a room shouting. He begins to weave a trap. The mainstream myth is well known. Hephaestus forges a net of unbreakable bronze, gossamer thin but stronger than any chain. He times it perfectly, laying it over the bed where Aphrodite and Ares meet. The moment their embrace begins, the net tightens, latching them together like fish flopping in a too small net. Hephaestus storms in, not with fists but with evidence, and drags the ensnared pair before the full court of Olympus. You trail behind, watching the scene unfold like a courtroom comedy. The gods are gathered. Zeus sits forward. Poseidon chuckles into his beard. Hermes smirks like someone seeing a prank video go viral. The lovers are tangled in shimmering chains, squirming and humiliated, unable to separate. Quirky detail. Vase paintings sometimes show this moment with every god in attendance, gawking like an audience at the ancient world's most awkward reality show. Historians still argue whether the myth was meant as a morality tale about adultery or simply an excuse for comic theater. The laughter roars louder than the flames of the forge. Apollo points, Hermes cracks a joke, and even Zeus, the king who has his own track record of questionable romances, cannot resist a grin. Only Poseidon seems sympathetic, begging Hephaestus to release the pair. It is humiliation on a cosmic scale, the kind of moment mortals would later retell, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that even gods suffer the same messy dramas. Yet behind the slapstick, you sense something sharper. Hephaestus isn't just a wronged husband looking for revenge. He is also staging a protest. By chaining the goddess of love and the god of war, he is exposing how Olympus thrives on hypocrisy, how beauty and violence sleep in the same bed, while craft and patience are laughed at. The joke isn't just on Aphrodite and Ares, it's on all of them. Of course, Olympus doesn't admit that. They guffaw, slap their thighs, and call for more nectar. The affair continues afterward. Nothing really changes. But Hephaestus has established his reputation. The god who traps, the god who embarrasses, the god whose inventions always contain a sting. And you, leaning in the corner, realize the prank is a prelude. If Hephaestus can build chains thin as spider silk that hold gods helpless, what else can he build? A chair, perhaps. A chair that looks inviting, feels cushioned, but refuses to let you go. Quick joke 1. You wonder if IKEA's trickiest flat pack screws are a tribute to him. Historians still argue. Quick joke 2. You imagine the headline on an Olympus tabloid: Ares and Aphrodite caught in bed. Husband crafts world's first bronze blanket. Quick joke 3. Somewhere in the mortal realm, a potter sighs. See? This is why you never invite your mother-in-law to dinner. The echoes of laughter fade, but the net remains in your mind. Delicate, intricate, impossible to escape. And you realize that Hephaestus has discovered his true medium. Not just weapons or jewelry, but the art of awkward entrapment. You follow Hephaestus back down into the forge after the net scandal, and you can almost see the new idea forming in his eyes. The laughter of Olympus still rattles around in his skull, like a song he never wanted stuck there. The humiliation has burned into him, but so has inspiration. If a net can trap lovers, why not build a seat that traps authority itself? A throne, yes. A chair that looks regal, glimmers with craftsmanship, and yet refuses to let go once you sit in it. The world's most awkward chair. He starts sketching it in soot across a bronze sheet. The legs curve like delicate vines, deceptively elegant. The backrest rises tall and stately, befitting a queen. The seat cushion looks soft enough to lull you into comfort, but beneath its surface, a mechanism of invisible chains and clamping bands waits, coiled and silent. He hammers bronze plates so thin they sing when struck, welding them into a frame that appears welcoming, too welcoming. Mainstream fact. Ancient sources, especially in Homeric hymns, hint at this tale of the cursed throne he gifted to Hera, his mother. It was dazzling, golden, irresistible. She sat, and the mechanism snapped shut, pinning her in place. Even the king of gods, Zeus himself, couldn't pry her free. Quirky tidbit, some versions say tiny golden serpents coiled out of the armrests, binding her wrists. Others say invisible chains simply grew tighter the more she squirmed. Historians still argue whether the chair was meant as revenge, protest, or just the blacksmith's twisted sense of humor. You imagine the scene. Hera, queen of heaven, drifting into the forge in stately suspicion. She sees the chair, gleaming, resplendent, carved with delicate leaves, perhaps even inlaid with gemstones that catch the torchlight. She lowers herself onto it, testing its comfort. At first, nothing. Then suddenly the cushions harden, the arms snap shut, and the Queen of Gods finds herself stuck like a fly in amber. Olympus panics. Zeus storms down, thundering for his wife's release. Ares rattles his sword. Apollo hums unhelpfully. Hermes offers puns. But none of them can solve the puzzle. Hera wriggles, Hera scolds, Hera fumes, but the chair will not release her. Hephaestus alone holds the key. You picture him standing in the corner, soot on his cheek, arms folded. He is the child once flung from the clouds, the husband once laughed at in chains, the craftsman no one thanked, and here he is, watching the gods fumble helplessly, caught in his creation. The message is undeniable. Underestimating him has consequences, and it is deliciously awkward. Imagine a royal banquet with Hera still glued to the seat, glaring at everyone who dares take another sip of nectar. Imagine the gossip among nymphs. The queen's throne is too comfy? Imagine mortal blacksmiths chuckling by their forges, retelling the story as proof that even the most glamorous gods can get stuck in furniture. You sense Hephaestus' satisfaction simmering like molten bronze. For once, the humiliation isn't his. It's hers. It's theirs. The gods are learning what it means to be trapped, what it means to be the butt of the joke. And though they don't know it yet, this chair will become legend. Not just a prank, but a symbol of awkwardness turned into power. Joke 1. You wonder if every squeaky office swivel chair is his spiritual descendant. Historians still argue. Joke 2. You imagine Hera shouting, "I'll just stand next time," while the chair smugly creaks in reply. Joke 3. You think about mortal banquets and how uncomfortable folding chairs feel. Turns out they're luxurious compared to this. And as the forge light flickers, you realize Hephaestus has achieved something rare. He has taken the insults, the laughter, the rejection, and hammered them into a device that makes Olympus itself sit down and shut up. You edge closer to the throne, and at first glance, it is kindness made visible. The bronze gleams like late afternoon honey. The cushion looks cloud soft, and the armrests curve with the sympathetic swoop of a good listener. You could almost nap in it. The trick begins with that almost. Hephaestus builds hospitality like a magician builds misdirection, by letting your eyes relax while the mechanism crouches. The seat gives a tiny sigh as you press it, the way fresh bread yields under a fingertip. Then, under the fabric, something whispers. Bands slip, collars ratchet, slender teeth glide along hidden tracks, and the softness becomes structure with the quiet finality of a lock. You trail your fingers along the backrest. Thin ribs of bronze are laminated like the layers of a seashell, springy enough to flex, stubborn enough to return to neutral. The effect is coaxing. Lean back, don't worry, we'll take care of you. Hephaestus hides everything dangerous under what feels like consent. A very gentle depression at the small of the back invites you to settle deeper. Tiny perforations in the cushion breathe cool air as if the chair knows you. You have no reason to notice the seam that isn't a seam, or the filigree that's actually a set of microhooks, or the hinge pin that doubles as a detent. Comfort is the camouflage for custody. Mainstream fact slides into place. The poets say Hephaestus made things that moved and obeyed, golden maidens to assist him, and tripods with wheels that rolled themselves into the gods' assemblies. If he can animate metal to walk, he can certainly persuade metal to wait. This chair doesn't lunge. It waits. It behaves. It gathers you the way a spiderweb gathers dew. Soft first, inevitable second. Joke 1. You check the underside for an I accept the terms and conditions box, but the only button is sit. Under the armrest, he erased the real signature. Golden handcuffs so delicate they look like bracelets misplaced by a cautious jeweler. They spring from recesses with courtly manners, circling wrists without bruising, at least not at first, then tightening by degrees as the sitter squirms. The more authority demands release, the more the metal pretends not to hear. Ergonomics, Hephaestus would say if he were feeling wicked, but for accountability. The phrase belongs to a man who has watched the powerful behave like weather and has decided to manufacture gravity. Quirky tidbit glints in the corner of your eye. On Lemnos, smiths, and apothecaries prized a reddish clay called Lemnian earth, stamped into tablets with a seal and sold as medicine. People swore it stopped bleeding and cooled fevers. Imagine the blacksmith mixing a pinch into the cushioning. Pure superstition, perhaps. But Hephaestus has always been a patron of materials that behave better than they should. A healing earth beneath a punishing seat. A contradictory comedy he would enjoy. Historians still argue whether that clay's fame echoes the island's link to him, or whether later writers retrofitted the association because it made such lyrical sense. You picture how the trap sequence plays. The sitter, say Hera, descends, notices the workmanship, enjoys the way gold leaf catches torchlight like a tame sunset. She lowers herself. The seat exhales to meet her. A tiny counterweight hidden in the back shifts. That movement trips a pawl. The pawl permits a band to slip one notch tighter under the cushion. Another notch. Another. The armrests, which seemed merely ornamental, rotate inward by fractional degrees, enough to make escape cost discomfort. Discomfort cost dignity. All of this happens while the chair purrs with civility. Hephaestus tunes the whole device like a lyre. Push too hard on the armrest? A secondary latch engages. Lean forward angrily? The back whispers no with a sliding wedge that meets you halfway. Shout at the maker? His golden maidens, remember them, glide in to dab brows, offer fans, and compliment the trapped sitter's poise in voices that sound suspiciously like polite customer service. Joke 2. You half expect someone to ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your seating experience? The chair dramatizes the problem of power. It looks like a throne. It behaves like a contract. You sign with your weight. It's not all mechanics. Hephaestus understands theater. He inlays the arm with tiny dolphins that appear to leap when the cuff slides. He engraves the back with laurel spirals that tighten visually as the restraints do physically. Beauty announces the moment of capture so that witnesses may admire and learn. The coup de grace is sonic. Minuscule bronze tongues under the cushion tingle when stressed, producing a thread of sound, not a shriek. More like a chime that says gently, "You are held." Joke 3. You think of the world's least relaxing doorbell. For a craftsman who once built a net as fine as spider silk, a throne is just a net with delusions of grandeur. But he's more sophisticated now. The net humiliated 2 people. The chair interrogates a system. Remember the barbecue fork thunderbolts you saw him forge? Those were weapons other people used in public. This is a device he uses in private rooms that suddenly have an audience. The embarrassment is curated. The point is discipline, not injury. Demonstration, not destruction. There is a technical flourish you can't stop admiring. The release. It exists, of course. Everything he makes must be solvable by its maker. But he hides it inside a logic puzzle. The band will retreat if and only if 3 forces balance. Pressure from the back, a lift at the right arm, and a counterclockwise twist at the wrist. A choreography easy for a limping smith who has rehearsed it 1,000 times, and maddening for a queen who has rehearsed only command. It's the furniture equivalent of a Heraclean knot. Simple to tie, subtle to loosen. Greek and Roman weddings love the knot of Hercules, unfastened on the wedding night for luck. Hephaestus, in some grim parody of nuptial ritual, gifts a knot that unfastens only for him. Historians still argue whether the chair legend grew out of ritual jokes people already told about bonds, belts, and vows. You run a hand along the grain of the bronze and feel faint ridges like growth rings in wood. He has worked the metal hot and cold, hammering and annealing, coaxing an elasticity that lets slender parts spring without snapping. Experimental smiths today would call this work hardening. He would just call it listening. A divine engineer isn't going to cram coil springs into a throne centuries before steel tempering makes such nonsense plausible. He's going to use geometry, patience, and leverage. The chair isn't smart, it's disciplined. And while you admire the elegance, you can't ignore the message tucked into the upholstery. He gifts this to Hera, not to Zeus, whose thunder keeps mortals honest, not to Ares, whose appetite for noise and bruises is obvious, to the queen who once lifted him and let go. The golden handcuffs gleam in the lamplight like a joke about equity that hasn't been invented yet. Golden handcuffs. How tidy the phrase will one day be for perks that persuade you to stay in a job you dislike. Here the metaphor becomes metal, and Olympus experiences HR the Hephaestus way. Word spreads. Servants whisper, nymphs wag eyebrows. Hermes snickers as only Hermes can. The throne sits there, shining like an apology wrapped around a grudge, waiting for the one person who shouldn't sit and will. Historians still argue whether this episode first belonged to Attic comedy, to the sober stream of epic, or to a Hellenistic taste for clever machines humiliating the mighty. Your ears don't care about provenance. They care about the tiny, anticipatory creak the chair makes when footsteps approach. You feel the room take a breath. The cushion looks softer than sleep. Somewhere, deep in the frame, a pawl tests its tooth against a ratchet, like someone licking a finger before turning a page. The throne is ready to read a queen. And above the forge, Olympus divides into those who think the prank is perfect justice and those who think it is unforgivable insolence. The chair doesn't vote, it merely holds. The forge's fire has died to a red glow, but the air above Olympus is still buzzing with scandal. You drift upward into the marble halls and find Hera still locked in place, shoulders tight, lips thin, her dignity chained not by visible ropes, but by the smug embrace of that golden chair. The room is thick with tension, the kind that tastes metallic on your tongue. Every god in attendance has an opinion, but no one has a solution. At first there's laughter again, though softer than with the net. Apollo hides a grin behind his hand. Hermes mutters a pun too quick to catch. And Dionysus, predictably, thinks the whole affair would go down easier with wine. The humor is contagious, but not unanimous. You notice Athena's brow furrow, her eyes sharp with disapproval. Not because she sympathizes with Hera, but because the prank smacks of chaos rather than order. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect genuine divisions in how Greeks viewed cleverness, as admired ingenuity, or as disruptive trickery. Mainstream fact: the Greeks often debated the ethics of Metis, cunning intelligence. Odysseus embodied it in war, but Hephaestus embodied it in craft. Was it virtuous to outsmart the mighty or dishonorable to humiliate them? The chair's prank was a test case. Quirky tidbit: some vase paintings hint that the gods actually staged dramatic retellings of these myths and feasts with actors reenacting Hera's struggle, proving that even divine embarrassment could be recycled into entertainment. As Hera squirms, the court fractures into factions. Zeus bellows threats but fails to act. He knows brute force can't budge the mechanism. Ares rattles his sword as if threatening the chair itself, which only makes the gods chuckle more. Aphrodite, standing off to the side, bites her lip. Whether from suppressed laughter or suppressed guilt, you can't quite tell. Poseidon, the eternal compromiser, proposes bribing Hephaestus with lavish gifts if he'll release her. Hermes suggests a contest. If anyone can out-engineer the chair, they win Hera's freedom. And Athena, ever the strategist, mutters that perhaps they should reflect on why Hephaestus felt compelled to do this at all. It's deliciously awkward. Olympus reduced to bickering children, while the one god they dismissed dictates the terms. Hephaestus himself doesn't even show up immediately. He lets them stew, a calculated silence that amplifies his power. The gods, who once tossed him out like scrap, now realize they must summon him back, plead for his cooperation, admit their dependence. Joke 1. You can almost hear a mortal scribe jotting, "Meeting could have been an email." Eventually, a delegation shuffles down to the forge. Poseidon volunteers, his beard trembling as he swallows his pride. You follow as they descend into the smoky cavern, where Hephaestus is pretending to be absorbed in polishing a shield. He doesn't look up until the silence grows unbearable. Then he smirks. Not cruelly, but with the weary satisfaction of someone who finally has leverage. The bargaining begins. Zeus promises him wealth. Poseidon offers him a seat in his palace under the sea. Athena suggests formal honors in Athens, where craft is revered alongside wisdom. And somewhere in the background, Dionysus shouts, "Give him more wine," as if drunkenness solves everything. Historians still argue whether these promises reflect real cult honors. Since in Athens, Hephaestus did share a temple with Athena, whilst in Lemnos he was worshipped as a local king. Eventually, Hephaestus relents, but not without conditions. In some versions, he demands reconciliation with Hera. In others, he asks for Aphrodite's hand in marriage. Some say he simply enjoys watching them squirm, and only releases Hera when he's satisfied she's learned humility. No matter the detail, the message is consistent. The outcast smith forces Olympus to recognize his power. Joke 2. You think about all the boring office chairs mortals suffer in, and realize maybe Hephaestus cursed humanity with them too, just to keep the comedy going. Joke 3. You imagine Hera vowing never to accept furniture again without running a full background check on the maker. When Hera finally rises from the throne, her face is pale with fury, but also flushed with something rarer. Embarrassment. The other gods scatter their laughter quickly, as though they didn't enjoy the spectacle too much. Hephaestus, meanwhile, lingers in the forge light, arms folded, proving once again that awkwardness, when wielded properly, can be sharper than any sword. The memory of Hera's entrapment lingers, but in the forge, Hephaestus is already on to the next problem. Company. Real company. Not the fickle kind that sneers at banquets. You watch him stand at the anvil, his limp heavier than usual, muttering not to himself but to the shadows. Then the shadows stir, and you realize they're not shadows at all. Figures glinting gold, their movements too precise to belong to mortals. Hephaestus has made helpers, automatons, golden maidens who glide across the workshop floor with the smoothness of living beings. They carry trays of tools, wipe soot from his brow, refill bellows with perfect timing. Their joints click like delicate music. Their faces remain calm. Their eyes glow faintly as if a coal has been hidden inside. For a moment, you wonder if they feel, if they think, or if they're merely mirrors reflecting the loneliness of their maker. Mainstream fact: Homer in the Iliad explicitly describes Hephaestus's golden handmaidens as having intelligence, speech, and skill, crafted with the knowledge of the gods themselves. That detail has tantalized scholars for centuries. The Greeks imagined not just machines, but machines with personalities, centuries before robots became a reality. Quirky tidbit: some later commentators even speculated that these automatons were early allegories for slaves, their golden sheen masking the uncomfortable truth of forced labor in Greek households. Historians still argue whether Hephaestus's creations were symbols of progress or satire of dependence. You notice how the automatons make the forge feel different. When Hephaestus coughs, one offers water in a goblet shaped like a seashell. When a spark jumps, another brushes it away before it can burn him. They do not flinch, do not tire, do not gossip. They are everything Olympus is not. And yet, in their polished perfection, they amplify his solitude. If friendship means risking mockery, betrayal, or laughter, then Hephaestus has built a loophole. Companions who never leave. Joke 1. You half expect one of them to hold up a sign reading, "Please rate your smithing experience. 5 stars only." The more you watch, the clearer it becomes that these are not just assistants. They're experiments in empathy. Hephaestus gives them voices, soft and soothing, perhaps mimicking the tones he longs to hear. He programs them to praise his work at just the right moments. You realize the god of awkward chairs and cursed nets is also the god of manufactured comfort, someone who understands that invention can soothe loneliness even when it can't erase it. But Olympus doesn't see it that way. When the golden maidens appear at feasts, serving nectar with uncanny precision, some gods whisper uneasily. Ares mutters that the forge has bred spies. Hermes jokes that they might replace heralds. Aphrodite watches them with an unreadable expression. Curiosity? Jealousy? Sympathy? The automata reflect as much about the viewer as about their maker. Joke 2. You think about how many mortals would gladly trade their unreliable coworkers for 2 indestructible bronze assistants who never call in sick. Still, the automatons give Hephaestus leverage. If he can make lifelike servants, he can make lifelike guards. If he can make chairs that bind queens, he can make banquet tables that decide who eats. His reputation grows not just as blacksmith, but as inventor, the unsettling kind who blurs the line between tool and trick. Historians still argue whether stories about his creations inspired later Greek fantasies of self-moving statues, the kind said to guard temples in Crete or Rhodes. You lean against the forge wall, half drowsy from the rhythmic motions of these golden figures. They clink, they glide, they hum faintly in harmony with the bellows. The sight is both eerie and comforting, as if you've stumbled into a dream where loneliness crafts its own cure. And in that quiet hum, you realize something. Chairs that trap, nets that shame, automatons that serve, all spring from the same place. A god who was cast out, who built companionship out of bronze, and who now ensures no one underestimates him again. Joke 3. You briefly wonder if Roombas are just his modern prototypes, minus the golden sheen, plus the occasional crash into a wall. The forge glows on, not with fire alone, but with the faint shimmer of artificial company, golden hands moving with endless patience. And Hephaestus, soot on his face, watches them work, content that if Olympus won't sit beside him, at least he can build someone who will. You start noticing a pattern in the forge. Whenever Hephaestus gives a gift, the wrapping paper smiles, but the bow has teeth. He is not petty so much as pedagogical. You watch him lay a necklace on velvet, a cup on a tray, a shield on a stand, and each time the presentation glows while a small lesson hums underneath, like a hidden tune only the patient can hear. Olympus calls it mischief. You suspect it's curriculum, office hours conducted in gold. He practices the ceremony of gifting with almost religious care. The brazier light is turned down so metal looks like honey. The golden maidens, remember those, from earlier, glide forward with a soft clink, carrying polished boxes that breathe a whisper of warm resin when opened. Hephaestus names each thing as if baptizing it. A helm that sits light as moonrise, earrings that pour light down a throat, a ring that remembers the shape of the finger that wears it. The room sighs. Somewhere inside, the pretty, however, a hinge has a conscience, a clasp has a memory, a pattern has an if-then clause. Mainstream fact. When Achilles loses his armor, it's Hephaestus who forges the replacement in the Iliad. That lavish shield etched with cities in peace and cities at war, fields and dances, sea and stars, a whole argument about life hammered into one disc. You run your fingers along the imagined relief and feel the moral of it. Even a weapon can be a syllabus. The bronze sings of consequence. A warrior carries the world he might break. He doesn't limit himself to heroes. In the Odyssey, King Alcinous's palace is guarded by gold and silver dogs of Hephaestus's making, everlasting, watchful, courteous to friends, terrible to foes. That's a gift that flatters and disciplines at once, a polite fence with a perfect bite. You picture the dog's eyes gleaming like coals, and you hear in their stillness the theorem Hephaestus likes best. Power that sits quietly is the most convincing kind. Then there are the presents mortals remember, as curses told in ribbons. Pandora is the prototype. At Zeus's order, Hephaestus shapes a woman bright as a festival lantern, all craftsmanship and breath, and the gift is given to Epimetheus with that notorious jar nearby. Beauty is the surface, an unasked-for test is the content. You hold the story in your hands the way you'd hold a complicated tool. Admiring, wary, aware that using it wrong has consequences. The lid lifts, the room fills, and the world learns that a present can be a policy. A softer box holds a harder tale. The necklace of Harmonia at the wedding of Cadmus and his bride, gleaming like moonlit ivy. Some say Hephaestus made it, some say he cursed it because Aphrodite's affair with Ares soured the idea of gifts without strings. Worn by queens and refugees in turn, the necklace shines on every neck and drags every life toward sorrow. Theban tragedies wearing couture. You can't help a backward glance at Hera's trick throne and think, even jewelry can behave like a chair if the maker is in a mood. Hephaestus also sends help as harm, and harm as help. A bronze giant named Talos clanks around the memory palaces of Greek storytellers, circling Crete 3 times a day, hurling rocks at pirates, invulnerable except for the single bronze nail sealing the ichor in his ankle vein. Is Talos a gift of safety or a warning that the line between safety and imprisonment is thin? You watch him stride the beach in your mind and decide it depends on which side of the stones you're standing. He gives in smaller ways too. Banquet gadgets that refill cups to the line but punish the greedy hand that tilts for more. Jewelry boxes that open for the wearer and nobody else. Doors that recognize a friend's footfall. Joke 1. You realize he invents two-factor authentication, except your second factor is don't annoy the smith. Around the forge, mortals pass along workshop legends about Pythagoras cups that dump wine down a tunic if you overpour. Whether or not Hephaestus ever made such a thing, everyone assumes he would approve. It's elegance with a wink and a mop. Not all his presents go upward. He likes mortals who like making things. You feel him soften when an apprentice from Athens arrives with burn-scarred knuckles and a head full of plans. Hephaestus sends the boy home with a hammer that rebounds true, a pair of tongs that don't fatigue the fingers, a file that sings the right pitch when the edge is square. The gifts glitter far less than a goddess's girdle, but the lesson is the same. A tool that protects your body also reshapes your fate. Joke 2, you consider asking him for a keyboard that deletes emails you'll regret before you send them. This is why his presents often prick. He is always teaching durability, responsibility, balance. If a queen sits without thought, held. If a warrior fights without thought, shown the world he risks. If a bride puts on beauty without thought, reminded that shine alone isn't a plan. Hephaestus wraps patience inside spectacle so that even the impatient must touch it once. Quirky tidbit. In some Voss scenes, Hephaestus arrives at banquets riding a mule. Carrying a wine-mixing bowl, he made himself as if to say, I brought the punch bowl and also the physics. You can hear the room laugh kindly, the awkward uncle with the best gadgets, and then fall quiet as the bowl's lip pours a perfect thread. Who else would bring hospitality, you have to learn? The gods are split on whether they like being educated at parties. Hermes coos over time-saving contraptions. Athena inspects joinery and nods. Ares complains that everything breaks when you hit it hard enough. Aphrodite pretends indifference while her eyes track every new hinge. And Zeus, who still thinks raw power is the final answer, drums his fingers on the table, trying not to admit that the gifts keep the palace from falling apart. Joke 3. You imagine a pop-up in the hall. This banquet is optimized by Hephaestus. Click here to accept cookies and consequences. Historians still argue whether the Greeks meant these gift stories as comedy about a lame god showing off, or as social critique about craft disciplining charisma. You lean toward both. The laughter lands because the lesson lands. Pretty without purpose is a liability. Strength without structure is a hazard. Power without patience gets stuck in chairs. When you step back from the piles of ribboned boxes and gleaming trays, the forge's heat feels less like anger and more like instruction. The air tastes of tin and pine resin. The hammer rhythms slow your breath. You realize that even your place in this story is a gift of a sort. A seat near the anvil where each clang says in gentle metal syllables, look closely, then take what you're given carefully. The forge quiets and you can feel Olympus itself holding its breath, half in awe, half in discomfort. Because the question everyone keeps circling is simple. Was the chair just a prank, or was it something more? You lean on a column, the bronze cool against your back, while the debate unfolds like a trial without verdict. One group insists it was comedy. Gods need their entertainment. And Hephaestus delivered a gag worthy of wine-spattered retelling. The queen glued to her own throne. Zeus forced to negotiate with his limping son. The whole divine court reduced to slapstick. Mainstream fact. Greek comedy, even in its early forms, thrived on reversals of power. Servants mocking masters, weaklings tricking the mighty. Hephaestus's chair fits that mold perfectly, a punchline in bronze. Others murmur that it was vengeance. Hera hurled him from Olympus as an infant. Now he made her sit, immovable, while everyone laughed. Quirky tidbit. Some later Roman versions sharpen the tale, turning it into a moral about filial defiance. proof that even divine motherhood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Historians still argue whether this interpretation reflects Greek myth itself or later cultures trying to moralize the story. And then there are those who whisper it was protest, not just against Hera, but against Olympus itself. The throne, after all, doesn't kill or wound, it humbles. It demonstrates how easily authority can be trapped when it assumes beauty is safety. The seat looked inviting, comforting, inevitable, until it wasn't. You realize Hephaestus may have built not just furniture, but philosophy in disguise. Joke 1. You imagine Hephaestus explaining himself. It's not revenge, it's performance art. The gods roll their eyes, mortals buy tickets. The scholars down the centuries have weighed in too. Some claim the chair represents the ambivalence Greeks felt toward technology. Was it salvation or subversion? A tool to free or a tool to humiliate? Think of Daedalus building wings that killed his son, or Pandora's jar releasing calamities. In this tradition, Hephaestus's chair isn't just furniture. It's a cautionary tale about innovation running ahead of wisdom. Others argue it was really about control within the pantheon. Hera's authority, Zeus's dominance, Athena's order, all shaken by one craftsman with a limp. Historians still argue whether the myth carried echoes of real Greek anxieties. Artisans versus aristocrats, skill versus status, labor versus lineage. The chair could be a coded reminder that power doesn't always come from the throne. It can come from the workshop, from the hands that shape the world. You see the gods split down the middle. Apollo makes jokes to smooth the tension. Athena files the episode away as a case study in cleverness. Ares fumes that the chair isn't something you can stab, and Poseidon mutters that at least his palace thrones never misbehave. Aphrodite smiles faintly as if to say she always knew her husband had claws. Joke 2. You picture a mortal carpenter carving a sign, "Beware of chair," and nailing it above the doorway just in case. The longer the debate drags on, the clearer it becomes. The awkward chair was never just a prank. It was a mirror. For the gods, it reflected arrogance. For mortals, it reflected anxiety about invention. For Hephaestus, it reflected a lifetime of rejection, reforged into leverage. Joke 3, you briefly wonder if modern office chairs that squeak embarrassingly in meetings are subtle descendants of his design, still humiliating the powerful, one wobble at a time. And so the story lingers not because it is funny, not because it is cruel, but because it refuses to settle. Was Hephaestus a clown, an avenger, or philosopher? The answer, like the seat itself, holds you fast the longer you sit with it. The story of Hera's awkward chair begins to ripple outward, seeding itself in other myths like pollen drifting across the Aegean. You realize quickly that Hephaestus wasn't the only craftsman, divine or mortal, associated with cursed furniture. Greek myth, and indeed myth more broadly, is sprinkled with seats, couches, and beds that you really don't want to test drive. Take, for example, the chair of forgetfulness in the sanctuary of Demeter at Eleusis. Mainstream fact. Initiates in the Eleusinian mysteries sometimes sat on a humble seat covered in a ram's fleece, symbolizing a ritual descent into the underworld. While not technically cursed, later rumor twisted it into something perilous. If you sat without permission, you could lose your memory or your mind. Quirky tidbit. Travelers centuries later claimed locals pointed out the chair that erases, a folk embellishment that historians still argue was either genuine tradition or a tourist attraction with spooky marketing. You drift across the sea to Crete, where Daedalus, the mortal counterpart to Hephaestus, was said to have built contraptions that blurred comfort and danger. Besides the labyrinth itself, there were tales of thrones or couches with hidden mechanisms. One lurid late variant even imagined that Pasiphae, cursed to desire a bull, used one of Daedalus's contraptions to carry out the impossible act. Whether furniture, trap, or satire, these stories underline the same unease. Sometimes a seat is an invention, and sometimes an invention is a trap. Joke 1. You picture an ancient showroom with a salesman saying, "This model comes with lumbar support, and this one with lifelong regret." Then there are the thrones of the underworld. Hades himself is said to have lured Persephone with a golden chair in some retellings, one so inviting she sat before realizing the banquet would bind her forever. Historians still argue whether this detail belongs to genuine ancient myth, or later expansions meant to dramatize the abduction. Either way, the theme is familiar. A throne that looks like welcome but functions like capture. Side tales multiply. In Thessaly, local legends told of a couch cursed by witchcraft, where lovers who reclined together would wake to find their affection turned to bickering. In Arcadia, a rock outcrop known as Zeus's Bench was rumored to trap anyone who lied while seated upon it. An antique version of a polygraph chair. Quirky tidbit: early Christian writers gleefully recycled these myths, comparing pagan gods to tricksters who built traps disguised as seats. Hephaestus' invention, you realize, wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a broader motif. Furniture as fate. Where mortals see rest, myths see vulnerability. To sit is to trust your weight to something else, to hand over balance and freedom. That trust makes a chair, or a couch, or a throne the perfect vessel for divine irony. Joke 2. You decide that in mythology, have a seat is never an innocent invitation. It's basically a threat. What sets Hephaestus apart is the artistry. Other cursed seats were crude punishments or moral tests. His chair was dazzling, engineered, a jewel of humiliation wrapped in beauty. It wasn't about scaring someone away. It was about luring them in. That extra step, the artistry of temptation, marks the difference between a cautionary fable and an unforgettable legend. Joke 3, you wonder if the modern whoopee cushion is just humanity's low-budget tribute to his legacy of awkward seating. The theme echoes far beyond Greece. Later Roman poets would embellish tales of emperors tricked by elaborate couches. Medieval legends spoke of Arthurian knights tested by a siege perilous at the Round Table, a seat reserved for the pure that destroyed pretenders. Even folk tales from northern Europe tell of stools that spin endlessly or benches that swallow guests whole. The motif of dangerous seating is everywhere, a reminder that even the act of resting can be perilous if the wrong craftsman gets creative. And here in the glow of Olympus, you realize that Hephaestus' chair wasn't just a single prank. It was the spark that made Beware the Furniture a running theme of myth and folklore. The awkward chair became archetype. You leave Olympus behind for a moment, drifting forward through centuries of storytelling, and you find yourself in the smoky corners of medieval halls, where myths have mutated like gossip after too much wine. Hephaestus is no longer simply the limping smith of Homer. He is rebranded, blurred with other figures, and reshaped by cultures who love nothing more than to embroider a joke into a legend. The awkward chair travels with him, becoming half rumor, half metaphor, never quite losing its gleam. By the Middle Ages, scholars copying manuscripts and cold scriptoria start to treat the old myths less like sacred tales and more like allegories. Hephaestus, renamed Vulcan by the Romans, becomes a lesson in misplaced cleverness. Monks scribble notes in the margins about how his golden throne was really a symbol of worldly temptation. Soft cushions disguising the bonds of sin. Mainstream fact: medieval writers often moralized Greek myths, turning them into sermons in disguise. Quirky tidbit: 1/12th century commentary even claimed Vulcan's trick chair represented the snares of idle curiosity, warning students not to linger too long in books that might trap them in heresy. Historians still argue whether that was genuine theological symbolism or a monk projecting his frustration at students falling asleep in class. You wander further into village gossip. In France, they whisper of the chaise de Vulcain, a chair said to sit in ruined chapels, cursed so that anyone who rests on it becomes stuck until the priest sprinkles holy water. In England, rustic storytellers merge Hephaestus' trick with fairy lore. A stool in the woods that, once sat upon, whirls you around 3 times and delivers you into the hands of mischievous sprites. The awkward chair becomes a wandering prank, hopping from culture to culture like a traveling minstrel. Joke 1. You picture medieval villagers explaining squeaky pews by saying, "Careful, Vulcan's chair is testing you." Among alchemists, Hephaestus morphs again. They revere him as patron of the hidden fire, the spark that transforms base metal into gold. His throne becomes a metaphor for experiments that promise beauty, but bind the unwary, elixirs that taste sweet, but poison the blood, crucibles that glow invitingly but shatter without warning. The awkward chair becomes not just prank, but parable. Sit in haste, repent in mercury. Meanwhile, artists illuminate manuscripts with miniature scenes of Hera or Juno in their Latinized imaginations, trapped in a gilded seat while smug Vulcan lurks nearby. The gold leaf on the throne gleams against dull parchment, mocking anyone who thought medieval art was humorless. Quirky tidbit. One surviving illumination even adds a tiny monk in the corner, covering his eyes as if to say, "This is awkward." Historians still argue whether that was satire or just a bored scribe having fun with a brush. By the Renaissance, humanist scholars dust off the old myths and retell them with gusto. Italian writers describe Vulcan as the inventor of chairs that flatter the eye but not the body. You can almost hear the echo of the court, where courtiers themselves sat on uncomfortable benches for hours, smiling through cramps. Joke 2. You imagine an ambassador muttering, "Truly, Your Majesty." This seat captures the spirit of diplomacy. Looks fine. Feels terrible. The legend keeps mutating. In some versions, the chair isn't punishment, but prophecy. A seat that reveals who is truly faithful and who is false. In others, it becomes the prototype for a magician's trap in chivalric romances, where knights sit down to prove bravery only to find themselves immobilized until they confess their sins. The awkward chair evolves from myth into metaphor, a traveling symbol of pride, tested, folly exposed, or truth revealed. Joke 3, you wonder if every medieval lecture hall full of stiff-backed benches was secretly designed by Hephaestus' fan club. And through it all, Hephaestus endures, not as the glamorous god, but as the craftsman remembered for the prank that never stopped echoing. His throne becomes sermon, spell, rumor, joke. A medieval smith hammers at an anvil in the twilight, and someone whispers, "Careful, don't let him build you a chair." And now, as the forge dims and the laughter of gods fades into echoes, you can let yourself drift into something softer. The rhythm of hammer and anvil slows, becomes the pulse of your own breath, steady and unhurried. The golden chair, with all its awkward tricks, is no longer a trap in your mind, but just a story, polished and put away, gleaming quietly on the shelf of imagination. You don't need to sit in it. You only need to let the thought of it dissolve, like sparks that flare and vanish in the air. Picture instead the workshop after everyone has gone. The bellows are still, the tools are cooling, the fire has settled into embers that glow like a heartbeat at rest. Hephaestus himself has laid down his hammer, his shoulders unburdened, his breath deep and even. The golden maiden stands silent in the corner, guardians of peace rather than productivity. The whole place hums with calm. You too can feel that calm. The stories of gods and chairs and laughter are only noise in the distance now. What remains is the gentle assurance that even awkwardness can be reshaped into beauty, that even rejection can be reforged into resilience. The chair does not hold you. The forge releases you. Every breath is a release, every exhale a loosening, every sigh a freedom. Let yourself sink into the comfort of your own seat, ordinary and safe, far from Olympus's tricks. The weight in your limbs grows softer, heavier, like cooled bronze. The air around you steadies into a whisper, a lullaby made of silence. The night wraps you like velvet. You are free, you are safe, you are still.